Marmalade. The cat was feeling very brave today. He saw a big old house at the end of the street. It looked dark and a little bit wobbly. What a wonderful place for a chase, he thought. His whiskers twitched with excitement as he trotted towards the creaky wooden door. The door was already a tiny bit open, just enough for a curious cat to slip inside. The air inside smelled of old dust and forgotten things, but Marmalade was a cat on a mission, so he did not mind the strange smells one bit. He was looking for a very particular mouse. Squeaky the mouse was also feeling quite adventurous. He had seen Marmalade heading for the old house and thought it would be the perfect place for a game of hide-and-seek. The house had so many dark corners and dusty nooks where a small mouse could hide perfectly. He scurried through the same open door, his little feet making almost no sound on the dusty floorboards. The house was enormous, with big rooms and tall ceilings that seemed to stretch up forever into the gloom. Squeaky felt a shiver of excitement, not of fear. This was going to be the best hiding spot ever. Marmalade tiptoed into a huge living room. A grand piano stood in the corner, covered in a white sheet that looked like a sleepy ghost. Old paintings on the wall had eyes that seemed to follow him as he moved. He heard a tiny scuttling sound behind a velvet curtain, and his ears perked up. Aha, the game begins now. He crouched down low, his tail swishing back and forth like a furry snake, getting ready to pounce on the unsuspecting curtain where he was sure the mouse was hiding. He wiggled his bottom, preparing for the big leap. Squeaky peeked out from behind a different chair far away from the curtain. He saw Marmalade getting ready to jump and giggled a tiny mouse giggle. This was going to be so much fun. The house was quiet, except for the sound of the wind whistling through a broken window pane. It was the perfect stage for their little game. The shadows danced on the walls, making funny shapes that moved and swayed. Squeaky knew all the best places to hide and was ready to lead Marmalade on a merry chase all through this spooky, wonderful place. As Marmalade prepared to pounce, a soft, tinkling sound came from the grand piano. Plink, plonk, plink. It played a little tune all by itself. Marmalade froze mid-wiggle, his eyes wide with surprise. He looked at the piano, then back at the curtain. The sheet on the piano lifted up a little bit, as if a hand was underneath it, and then it waved at him. Marmalade blinked. Cats do not usually see pianos waving. He forgot all about the mouse for a moment and stared at the friendly dancing sheet. It was a very odd thing to see. Squeaky was just about to scurry to a new hiding spot when a dusty book on a high shelf flew open. Its pages started to flutter all by themselves, as if a gentle breeze was reading a story. But there was no breeze inside the house. Squeaky watched, his little nose twitching. Then a ghostly whisper seemed to float down from the ceiling, saying "boo" in a very soft, playful voice. Squeaky wasn't scared, he was curious. He had never been in a house where the books could read themselves. It was a very peculiar and interesting surprise. Marmalade decided to ignore the musical piano and get back to his chase. He crept towards the kitchen, following a faint, cheesy smell he thought might be the mouse. But as he passed a long hallway, a suit of armor standing against the wall suddenly raised its metal arm and tipped its helmet at him. Clang! Marmalade jumped back, his fur standing on end. He had never been greeted by a metal man before. A quiet, ghostly giggle echoed down the hallway, but it was so light and airy that it sounded like the wind. Marmalade thought the house was very strange. Squeaky found his way into the kitchen, hoping for a crumb. He saw a glass jar of sweets on the counter. Suddenly, the lid of the jar unscrewed itself, and a single sweet floated out and landed right in front of him. Squeaky nibbled on the sugary treat, feeling very lucky. The ghosts in this house were very kind, he thought. They played music, read stories, and even gave out sweets. He did not know that a playful spirit, a little girl who once loved sweets, was smiling down at him from a place he could not see. Marmalade, still a bit shaken by the polite suit of armor, heard a loud crash from the library. He raced towards the sound, thinking, "That must be the mouse. He is a very clumsy mouse." He skidded into the room, ready to catch his foe. But what he saw made his heart leap into his throat. A tall stack of books had toppled over, sending up a huge cloud of dust. In the middle of the dust cloud, he saw a shadowy figure with two big round ears and a long thin tail. A monster! Marmalade gasped to himself, not realizing it was just Squeaky's shadow, made huge by the dim light. Squeaky had accidentally knocked over the books while climbing a shelf. When the dust settled, he looked up and saw something truly terrifying. Peeking over the top of a fallen book was a huge furry face with glowing green eyes and very, very sharp teeth. A low growl rumbled through the room, making the floorboards vibrate. "A beast!" squeaked Squeaky in terror. He didn't know it was just Marmalade, whose face looked extra scary in the spooky shadows of the library. Squeaky's little heart beat like a drum against his ribs. Marmalade decided he had to be brave. He let out his mightiest, most ferocious roar to scare the monster away. Meow! Roar! It echoed through the dusty room. He puffed up all his fur to make himself look bigger and more fearsome, his tail lashing back and forth angrily. This was no time for games. This was a time for survival. He thought the shadowy monster with the big ears was the scariest thing he had ever seen in his entire life, much scarier than waving pianos or clanking suits of armor. He prepared to defend himself from the terrible creature. Squeaky heard the terrifying roar and saw the furry beast get even bigger. He did the only thing a small mouse could do when faced with such a horrifying monster. He let out the loudest, most piercing squeak he could manage. Squeak! The high-pitched sound shot through the air like a tiny arrow. It was a sound of pure panic. He was convinced that the giant, green-eyed creature was about to eat him in one gulp. He was much more frightened of this furry beast than he was of any playful whispering ghosts. The giant furry monster with the green eyes let out another earth-shaking roar. The shadowy creature with the huge ears let out another ear-splitting shriek. For a moment, they both stood frozen in the dusty library, two brave hunters who now felt very, very small and very, very scared. Marmalade saw the shadow monster twitch and he was sure it was about to charge. Squeaky saw the green-eyed beast's whiskers tremble and he was certain it was about to pounce. The playful ghost watched from the corners, giggling softly at the silly misunderstanding between the cat and the mouse. That was it. Marmalade had had enough. This house was not fun anymore. It was filled with terrible monsters and loud noises. He turned around so fast that he skidded on a loose rug. He didn't look back. He ran out of the library, his paws thumping on the floorboards. He shot down the long hallway, not even noticing when the suit of armor waved a friendly goodbye. He was a cat on a mission, but his mission had changed. Now, his only goal was to get out of the scary, monster-filled house as fast as his four legs could carry him. Squeaky didn't wait a second longer either. That furry beast was too big and too loud. This was the worst game of hide-and-seek ever. He turned and scampered away in the opposite direction. He zipped under a doorway and into the kitchen, his little legs a blur of motion. He didn't even stop to look at the sweet jar. He scurried past the grand living room, not even glancing at the piano that was now playing a fast, frantic tune, as if cheering on his escape. All he could think about was the terrible roar of the beast. Marmalade burst out of the front door and ran left, not stopping until he was safely back in his own garden. Squeaky scrambled out through a little hole in the kitchen wall and ran right, not pausing until he was tucked away in his cozy mouse hole. They both sat, panting, their hearts still racing. They never went back to the old house again. They were much more scared of the monsters they thought they saw than they ever were of the gentle, playful ghosts who just wanted to make new friends. The ghosts were left all alone, waiting for someone new to play with.